No. Not sure what to do about that. Did he give you any instructions on the actual mic? It needs to not be on a red light.
Test. Oh, okay then.
Apparently I'm just too far away. Well, thank you all for being here. My name is Parker Diggory. I'm the Director of Religious and Spiritual Life here at Skidmore. And I know there are a lot of places that you guys could be. I hear there's some sort of baseball game tonight, I guess, that some of you might be interested in. So I appreciate that you're here. And I just want to do a couple logistical things and then turn it over to our real focus for the evening. One of those things is that after the event here, there will be some refreshments out in the lobby, so we encourage you to join us for that if you'd like. And students, if you're interested in continuing this conversation this evening, I will be with David Solovey over at Wilson Chapel at 9 to continue the conversation. And I also just encourage you to keep your eye out for other events around these topics and to get in touch with us if you're interested in being part of the thinking behind what some of those events might look like. So I encourage you to do that. And David will be talking a little bit about some of the co-sponsors for this, but I especially wanted to highlight Hillel International's Hinenu program and the Jacob Perlow Fund, which was a co-sponsor as part of the Jacob Perlow series. And for those of you who are fans of the series, as I am myself, remember that on November 8th, we have another lecture by Yael Silliman about the Jewish community in Calcutta, which should be very interesting. So mark your calendars for that. It will be in Davis at 7:30 on November 8th. And so without further ado, I want to introduce one of our students. He's a sophomore here, put in so much time and energy starting last spring, over the summer, pulling together every detail, and he will do our introduction of our speaker, David Solovey.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is David Solovey. I'm the Skidmore Hillel. I'm Skidmore Hillel's Israel Affairs Coordinator. I'm also the project leader of Hillel's new series, Perspectives. I would like to thank you all for coming to our first installment of the new series. I would like to start with thanking our funding and organizing co-sponsors, Hillel International, the Jacob Perlow Lecture Series, and the Office of Religious and Spiritual Life. A big thank you to Auden Thomas from the Office of the Dean of Special Programs, and my mentor is Parker Diggory, who is the head of the Office of Religious and Spiritual Life, and Lolly Abramson, the recently retired coordinator of Jewish Student Life. I would like to thank Mr. Eid for coming to speak with us today, and his colleague Batya Rubashkin, the Associate Director of the Center for Near East Policy Research. Batya has helped me day and night for months to help me put together the logistics of bringing Mr. Eid to Skidmore. I would like to thank our co-sponsors, Hayat and Christian Fellowship. I spoke with many of the members of these boards, and they helped me build an objective of what the series should be all about. In such tense political times, many like to stray away from hearing opinions that they don't necessarily agree with. These e-boards decided to co-sponsor to start a series that invites many different perspectives on Israel and Palestine. We all come from different views of the conflict, sometimes very polar. For example, I would like to cite my biases. I tend to lean to the right side of the aisle. I spent a year in Israel, and my opinions are very traditionally pro-Israel. But I think we have done something very profound today that is rare on college campuses. We have all put aside our biases and sponsored this event as organizations in order to show a point of view, even though none of us formally endorse the opinions of the speaker. I would love to give a round of applause to Hillel eBoard and our sponsoring eBoards for taking this big step of sponsoring this event. I hope that I can complete my job of finding a diverse group of speakers for future talks of this series. Now I'd like to give a very short summary of what the conflict in Israel and Palestine currently is. Since the founding of Israel in 1948, there's been an endless cycle of violence between Israel and Palestinian governments and groups. There has been no answer, and the chances of peace seem little to none. There are many opinions of what would end the conflict and what problems there are in the region. Bassem Eid has a perspective we would like him to present today. Mr. Eid's biography includes numerous achievements. More information about his work is available from his website and the Center for Near East Policy Research. By way of introduction, I shall share some of his biography now. Bassem Eid is a Jerusalem-based political analyst, human rights activist, and commentator on Arab and Palestinian affairs. He was born in the Jordanian-occupied Old City in East Jerusalem and later lived in the United Nations Refugee Works Agency in a refugee camp called Shuafat. He spent the first 33 years of his life there. He rose to prominence during the First Intifada, the Palestinian uprising, and was a senior field researcher for B'Tselem, the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the Occupied Territories. In 1996, he founded the Jerusalem-based Human Rights Monitoring Group, Palestinian Human Rights Monitoring Group. In 2016, Bassem assumed the role of chairman of the Center for Near East Policy Research. He has publicly condemned the widespread murder of Palestinian dissidents, often for reasons unrelated to the Intifada. He has been critical of human rights policies of both Israeli and Palestinian armed forces. In 1995, he came under attack by some Palestinian leaders for revealing human rights violations committed by the Palestinian Authority. Arrested by Yasser Arafat's presidential guard, he was released after 25 hours following widespread international condemnation, mainly from the Clinton administration. In response to the deterioration of the human rights situation under the PA, Bassem founded the Palestinian Human Rights Monitoring Group, which monitors abuses committed by the PA and also deals to some extent with Israel. It is a nonpartisan human rights organization dedicated to exposing human rights violations and supporting a democratic and pluralistic Palestine. He is also an outspoken critic of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, otherwise known as BDS. Bassem has traveled widely to lecture on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and has attended international conferences. His many appearances include the British Parliament's Henry Jackson Society and the New York State Assembly in Albany. His notable publications include Neither Law Nor Justice, Human Rights in the Occupied Territories Since the Oslo Accords, as well as Fatah and Human Rights Violations in the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict, published by the University of California, Los Angeles. He also contributes editorial articles to publications such as the Jerusalem Post and the Times of Israel. The Association for Civil Rights in Israel has awarded him the Grunswig Memorial Award. He is also the recipient of the Litvak Human Rights Memorial Award, granted by McGill University Faculty of Law and the International Human Rights Advocacy Center, Inter Amicus, and the award of Italy's Information Without Boundaries. I would like to share that we would love to hear everyone's voice. We would like to hold a small panel in the chapel after the talk, which Parker talked about, because I really think it's important we hear everybody's thoughts. Without further ado, thank you for helping me kick off this series. After Bassem finishes speaking, we'll be holding a 15-minute question and answer session where anyone may ask Mr. Eid a question. I do ask that we keep the questions to 30 seconds so we can get as many questions answered as possible. Now please join me in welcoming Mr. Bassem Eid.
Thanks for everyone, and good evening to everyone. I would like to thank you, David, with your staff, for organizing this event, and to extend my thanks to the Skidmore College for hosting this event, and of course to thank the sponsor of the event, which is among them the Hillel International. As David mentioned, I am a human rights activist, a non-political person, never ever been affiliated with any Palestinian movement or a party. I started my human rights career with an Israeli organization called B'Tselem. I used to be the field researcher for B'Tselem for 7.5 years. And after the Oslo Accord and after the arrival of the Palestinian Authority to the West Bank and Gaza, I decided to resign from B'Tselem and to create a Palestinian organization to monitor and to focus on the violations committed by the Palestinian Authority. As you know, to create human rights under the Arab regime, it looks like to commit a suicide. So this is one of the reasons why I was arrested by Yasser Arafat in 1996, but I was so lucky that I kept in jail only for 25 hours because of the intervention of the American administration in that time, and mainly the Foreign Secretary of the US, Warren Christopher. Few years ago, I became more and more as a political analyst towards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and mainly towards the internal Palestinian political affairs. And this evening, I am going to talk much more about my own side as a Palestinian, where we, the Palestinians, is standing on right now. And I would love to start here from the Gaza Strip, because looks like that the Gaza Strip these days is not only an obstacle to the Israelis, but also it became an obstacle to the Palestinians themselves, and even an obstacle to the Egyptian government. If we will look today to inside the Gaza Strip, we will find that there are 4 different players playing inside the Gaza Strip. The first player is the Egyptian government. The second player is the Palestinian Authority of the West Bank. The third player, of course, the Hamas, who is ruling the Gaza Strip. But the fourth player is Israel. What is the difference here between these 4 different players? Today, the Egyptian government and the Palestinian Authority are working together in terms to cause more and more destruction on the Gaza Strip. Why? Because the Egyptian government believes that the Hamas is a terrorist organization. The Egyptian government believes that while more and more pressure Egypt will impose on Gaza, that's probably the only way to get rid from the Hamas organization. What is the interest of the Palestinian Authority? The Palestinian Authority also believes that while Egypt imposing more and more pressure on the Gaza Strip, that probably will pave the way for the Palestinian Authority to return to the Gaza Strip and to recontrol Gaza Strip as they used to do till 2007. Now, in my opinion, the Israelis and the Hamas are much more interested in the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. So if Israel and the Hamas are interested in the reconstructing of Gaza Strip, where is the conflict here? The conflict is that the Hamas said that the priority for the reconstructing of Gaza should have to go to our own tunnels and our own military capability. While Israel said, no way. The priority for the reconstruction in Gaza should have to go to the houses and to the other civil facilities which has been destroyed during the 2014. And this is unfortunately why the whole reconstruction of the Gaza Strip almost delayed for 3 years. Friends, if we look today to the Rafah passage, which is dividing Gaza from Egypt, during the last year, 2016, the Rafah passage was open only for 20 days during the whole year. How many Palestinians succeed to cross it from Gaza to inside Egypt? 20,000 only. If we will move to 2011, how many Palestinians succeed to cross the Rafah passage from Gaza to Egypt? 460,000. So the number almost dropped from 500,000 to 20,000. And that's showing the real pressure that Egypt right now trying to impose on the Gaza Strip. Now, if we will move to the West Bank, I am a person who believes that if President Abbas tomorrow morning will meet with the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, I believe that probably the first question that Netanyahu is going to ask Abbas, whom you are representing, Mr. President? Gaza Strip, Palestinians diaspora, or the West Bank? In my opinion, President Abbas only representing his two sons and his wife. I think that there is a lack of trust since years ago between the Palestinians and their own leadership. If you will come today to any ordinary Palestinian and asking him, what are the most three priorities that you are seeking? He will say a job to survive, to secure the education system and the health system for my children. Nobody is talking about settlements. Nobody is talking about the wall. Nobody even talking about the foundation of the Palestinian state. Which means that the majority of the Palestinians these days are people who are seeking dignity rather than identity. I used to tell my Palestinian colleagues in the refugee camp that homeland is not the place where you're born. Homeland is the place where you can find dignity, justice, and freedoms. This is the real homeland. I think that there are a huge frustration these days from the Palestinian people towards their own leadership. I didn't see that the Palestinian leaders, since the Oslo Agreement and since the arrival of the Palestinian Authority, is trying to improve the daily life of the Palestinians, or even trying to improve the economy of the Palestinians. Everybody said that before Oslo, our situation used to be better. But after Oslo, things are getting worse and worse. And this is the reality right now on the ground. Friends, if we will look to the Middle East map today, and how is the Islamist terror increasing, I think that we will find that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is probably the most safe place in the Middle East. As a Palestinian, as a Muslim, I don't want to be in Syria. I don't want to be in Iraq. I don't want to be in Libya. I don't want to be in Yemen. It's much safer for myself and for my children to continue living under the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, one of the major problems of the conflict that the conflict is not anymore in the hands of the Palestinians and the Israelis. It's almost out of the hands of the Israelis and the Palestinians. And so many different parties right now trying to play with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Looks like sometimes that the international community itself became a part of the conflict rather than a part of the solution. And this is one of the major tragedies, I can call it, for the Palestinians and the Israelis, that we are unable to control the conflict. And that's remind me with a famous guy once said that it is very easy to explain the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but it is very difficult to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So we can talk years about the conflict, but we will never be able to find any kind of solution for the conflict. Sometimes it makes me sad as a Palestinian when some of the leaders, especially in Europe, standing up by saying, if Israel is not going to resume the peace negotiations with the Palestinians, we are going to recognize the Palestinian state. Which state you are going to recognize? Where is the state that you want to recognize? It's a state which is in a lack of institutions. It's a state which is in a lack of infrastructure. It's a state which is in a lack of economy. It is a state where 54% of its population are still living in a refugee camp. This is not the state that I want. This is not the state that the Palestinians are dreaming for. I think that the international community should have to stand up and to start helping the Palestinians to build the state in terms to recognize it afterwards. You couldn't recognize a state before you are building a state. First, you need to invest in the building of the state, and afterwards, to recognize it. And this is also one of the most failure thing of the international community since the Oslo Agreement until today, that hundreds of billions of dollars has been donated to the Palestinian Authority. But those hundreds of billions of dollars were unable to create one job in the West Bank or one job in the Gaza Strip. And the question, where the money has been gone. Everybody knows that there is a huge corruption among the Palestinian Authority. And there is a lack of law under the Palestinian Authority, a lack of justice. That people couldn't pay any kind of accountability for their bad attitude. So where we are, we became so divided, by the way, since the Hamas took over the Gaza Strip in 2007. And there is another important issue that we must have to mention it here. I remember when the former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, when he declared on his plan to withdraw from the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian leadership in that time, including the Hamas, by the way, start running from one TV show to another TV show, saying that if Israel will withdraw from Gaza, we are going to make from Gaza Singapore. I've never been in Singapore, but I'm wondering if the situation in Singapore are similar to Gaza these days. So we failed to build a state in the Gaza Strip. We failed to manage the daily life of our people in the Gaza Strip. And this is how the Gaza Strip became as a huge place for suffer. No more and no less. Because of the bad management of the Palestinian leadership, not because of the Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. And these days, no doubt that the Israeli leadership is very scared to repeat the same lesson that they did in Gaza. The Israeli leadership will never, ever leave the West Bank right now, because they already learned what's happening in Gaza, and they don't want the West Bank to be similar like the Gaza Strip. Now, I believe that the Fatah and the Hamas together, trying to create a kind of unity, And that initiative came after the failure of the both sides. The Hamas already failed to manage the Gaza Strip in the past 10 years, and especially after the war 2014. And the Palestinian Authority failed to create any kind of negotiations or peace negotiations with Israel. So the both sides almost failed in the past 10 years, and that's probably one of the reasons why the both sides want to create a kind of unity. If that unity is going to take place, nobody knows. Because in the past 10 years, the Fatah and the Hamas almost signed 5 different agreements to create unity. And the unity is still so far away after signing 5 different agreements. I think that we, the Palestinians, every day, are trying to make our own accountability on our situation. And I didn't see these days that the Arab countries are really aware about the Palestinians. I think that each Arab country these days almost is stuck in its own mud. And the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not the main issue of the Arab countries these days. It's the opposite. We can see from the media that the Arab countries, one after the other, are trying speedy to approach Israel and to create a kind of normalization, especially in the Gulf countries. I think that the Gulf is so aware from the Iranian threat, and looks like that some countries in the Gulf, mainly the Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, almost create a kind of security coordination with Israel. We can see in Tel Aviv some Arab delegations who has been hosted in Tel Aviv by the Israeli government, from Saudi Arabia and from the United Arab Emirates. I believe that those delegations never ever mentioned in front of the Israelis the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They are much more dealing with security arrangements if any threats will be imposed by Iran towards the Gulf countries. So nobody is standing right now behind the Palestinians, nobody trying to defend or even to help the Palestinians, and looks like that this conflict is going to take a while. I am not expecting in the coming 10 or even 20 years that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will be solved, unfortunately. So it's a question of time, but in the meantime, we, the Palestinians, is still holding the key for a better life. I believe that we, the Palestinians, also should have to look into ourselves and to try to manage our life much better than we did until these days. So probably I will stop right now and give you the opportunity to ask some questions in terms to make things more clear. Thank you very much.
All right, so just raise your hand if you have a question, and someone will bring a mic to you.
Can you describe what life was like growing up in the refugee camp?
Yeah. It's a horrible place, by the way. You know, as a refugee, I visited most of the refugee camps, not only in Gaza and in the West Bank, but also in Lebanon, in Jordan, and in Syria. The situation of the camps in Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan are much more horrible than it is in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. And I'm asking myself all the time, how long the Palestinians should have to stay in those horrible refugee camps. We almost 70 years. For how long more? But I think that this is also something which is the international community should have to be criticized on. UNRWA today, the UN Relief Works Agency, is very interesting, by the way, to continue keeping the Palestinian refugees as hostages inside the refugee camp. Because while keeping the Palestinians as hostages in the refugee camps, this is the only way how can UNRWA ensure its power and its money. It's like somebody once asked me, why UNRWA is not solving the problem of the Palestinian refugees? I said, for one reason. Because if UNRWA will solve the problem of the Palestinian refugees, then the 30,000 employees of UNRWA will become jobless and refugees. This is the problem. This is the problem. For how long you can continue keeping us in a refugee camp? I think that we, the Palestinians, should have to create a kind of initiative from the refugee camps against UNRWA and against the UN. Because these people of UNRWA and the UN are surviving on our suffer. So without initiating something inside among the refugees, I believe that these refugees probably will continue living in these refugee camps for another 70 years.
Hi. I just had a question about birthright. There's a new movement called Return the Birthright.
Called what?
Birthright, as in the trip to Israel.
Both right?
Birthright? Sorry.
No, I didn't really hear about such kind of movement, you know.
Oh, okay. The question was, well, are you clear of what birthright is? Yeah. Okay, so basically, there's a trip to Israel as a Jewish individual, but I was wondering what your thoughts were, especially about, there's a new movement called Return the Birthright, where it's Jewish individuals refuse to go on birthright for the sake of trying to say that if Palestinians can't be in their home, then we shouldn't have a trip to, a free trip for birthright. Sorry, that was probably poorly worded.
See, I'm not familiar, you know, with the movement that you are talking about. I have no idea what is their own goals and their own aims here. What I want to say that there are so many groups, so many organizations, so many initiatives, so many conferences. It's the whole earth is full of initiatives for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and unfortunately nothing is moving forward right now. The opposite. While we have a new initiative, then we are moving backward. When we have a new movement, we are moving backward. When we have a new NGO, we are moving backward. This is one of the problems also of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I saw a demonstration, 2 weeks ago in Jerusalem and in the West Bank, where Israeli Jewish women and Palestinian women demonstrating for peace. I saw them, among the mountains between Jerusalem and Jericho, how they are walking together and holding the flags of the two countries and shouting towards their own leaders, of course, the Israelis and the Palestinians, when you are going to give us peace. I am a person who believes in such kind of individual initiatives. I think that the both sides, the Israelis and the Palestinians, also must have to stand up and to start shout towards their own leaders in terms to impose more and more pressure to bring peace. But on the other side, peace couldn't come within 24 hours. And that's reminding me, when some leaders standing and saying, we are with the two-state solution. What does it mean you are with the two-state solution? Where is the other state here? Where is the other state? So, and that's leading me, much more towards the American administration, the new American administration, and Mr. Trump, when in May he met with Mr. Netanyahu at the White House, and we remember, the most popular statement of Trump in that time, that he said, 1 state, 2 state, 3 state, whatever you will choose, I will like it. Come on. Are you the person who is going to solve it? Are you really the one who is going to solve it? Of course not. It's just rubbish, all the statements that we are hearing from all of the leaders around the world, it's only rubbish. And I am a person who believes in one thing, that only the Palestinians and the Israelis who are able to solve the conflict, not a third party at all. Because since 1948 until today, we almost have over than 150 different third parties, which all of them almost failed. So without a goodwill, without building the bridges of confidence between the Israelis and the Palestinians, I don't ever believe that any third party can bring peace for the Israelis and the Palestinians.
Excuse me. Hi. You were talking about in the general Palestinian populace that the real concerns are, having a job, their education for their family, and there was a third one. Health, right. Do you see a scenario, do you see any possible scenario where Israel would have sovereignty over the territories and still have the Palestinian people feel like they're prospering under Israeli sovereignty? Or is that impossible? Is that not even?
I think that there is a kind of initiative, but it is much more from the right-wing parties in Israel, like Naftali Bennett as an example, who is trying to impose pressure on the government to take sovereignty on the West Bank. I don't believe that Israel ever will do it, because Israel almost controlling the West Bank in the past 50 years, and they never ever try to annex it to Israel. Because if Israel tomorrow will decide to annex the West Bank to Israel, then Israel couldn't come anymore by talking about a Jewish state. Because then you will have, in the coming probably 20 years, the majority of the residents of the state will be Arabs rather than Jewish. Today in Israel, you have 2 million. In the West Bank, you have another 2 million, 4 million together. So I don't believe that Israel, for demographical reasons, will ever accept to annex the West Bank to Israel. The right wing is still much more interesting because the right wing believe in one thing, or they want to approach or to achieve one important thing, that if we will annex the West Bank to Israel today, nobody will ask us tomorrow to evacuate any settlements. And these settlements will be permanent forever. That's exactly the main aim that the Israeli right wing want to achieve. But I know that the government, and mainly Netanyahu, is against the idea. There was a conference 3 months ago in Jerusalem, organized by an organization called Women in Green. You know, we have women in black, we have women in green, we have women in pink, we have women in yellow, we have all colors of women there. This organization made a big conference in Jerusalem. Over than 800 people were there, including Palestinians, by the way, including Palestinians from the West Bank. And the main issue of the conference was how to impose the Israeli control on the West Bank. Imagine. And Palestinians participated. And Palestinians said, you are most welcome to annex the West Bank. Because if Israel tomorrow will declare that we are going to conduct a census in Hebron, yeah, in turn to give an Israeli ID card, then all of Jenin and Nablus tomorrow morning, early morning, will move to Hebron to be under the census that Israel is going to conduct. And this is also one of the major problems right now. If you will take East Jerusalem today, in East Jerusalem you have 120,000 Palestinians are living there. You couldn't believe that 30% of them, 30% of them, already got the Israeli citizenship. Imagine if in the coming 5 years, Israel will continue accepting Palestinians as citizens, then in 5 years, probably the majority of the Palestinians in East Jerusalem will be an Israeli citizens. Then the Palestinian Authority couldn't claim any kind of sovereignty, neither on East Jerusalem or on the Palestinian Jerusalemized who are living in Jerusalem. And looks like that this is the plan of Israel right now, to give as much as we can citizenship to the Palestinians in East Jerusalem. Of course, if they have no security record. And then within 10 years, it will be one of the major problems, Jerusalem, if it is yours or it is mine. And people in Jerusalem are not care who is going, to control them or who is going to rule them. The people in East Jerusalem are much more interesting in a better level of life. And if the Israeli passport giving me a better level of life, I have no problem to take it. That's exactly what the people are thinking. Yeah.
What is your opinion on movements like the BDS movement, and do you think they're beneficial for the Palestinians?
See, I am totally anti-BDS. I think that the BDS is causing a huge damage to the Palestinians. I don't think that the BDS trying even to take care about those, after those Palestinian workers whom lost their jobs as a result of the activity of the BDS. I used to say all the time that the BDS used to be jobless and they found a job. And looks like that it is a long-term job because we are talking about an unsolved conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians. First of all, I didn't see any kind of support for the BDS among the Palestinians, by the way. If you will go to the central cities every early morning, to Nablus, to Ramallah, to Jenin, to Tulkarem, to Bethlehem, you will find hundreds of thousands of boxes full of fruits and vegetables with the Hebrew writing. I believe that that didn't come from Jordan, neither from Egypt. It came from Israel. The whole Tnuva products are in the refrigerators in the old supermarkets in the West Bank. I am traveling every day there, and I can see everything over there. So people are not, the Palestinians, first of all, are not care about the BDS. The majority of the Palestinians has no idea what is the BDS is. And that's reminding me, 2 years ago, when the Soda Stream moved from the West Bank to the south of Israel, and as a result of that, 1,500 Palestinians lost their jobs. I met some of those Palestinians who used to work at the Soda Stream, and I asked them once, do you know who is standing behind losing your job? One of them said no. I said, the BDS. Then he looked to me by saying, oh, show me the BDS, I want to kill him. So he has no idea what is the BDS is. Now over the 1,500 Palestinians lost their jobs. Some of them till today, they didn't find a job. Now this is not the problem that you only lost your job. The problem is that your children losing their medical insurance when you are losing your job. So what is the BDS trying to help? Just nothing. And that's reminding me, 2 months ago, the Israeli President Rivlin went to visit one of the biggest factories in a settlement in the south, in the north of the West Bank called Al-Qana, where is over than 2,000 Palestinian workers in that settlement. The Palestinian workers came to Rivlin and said to him that while the BDS calling to boycott Israel, that's first of all hurts us. So people are aware about the results of the activities of the BDS, that these people are calling to close factories, and afterwards we will lose our jobs. So I didn't see also that boycotting Israel, that will bring peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. I don't believe that that will resume the peace negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians. I think that the BDS should have to find a much effective, let's say, a policy towards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
So like a two-part question. So like in light of the recent agreement between Hamas and the PA, does that give you any hope for, a brighter outlook for the Palestinians? And then also like how can we how can anyone bring about like the demilitarization of political parties in Palestine?
See, towards the agreement, as I said, we already signed, 5 different agreements before the agreement which has been signed 10 days ago in Cairo. So that's not giving, for the Palestinians any kind of impression that the reconciliation and the unity will be created. People are still very suspicious towards that. And beside that, since that agreement signed between the Fatah and the Hamas in the past 10 days, nothing changed on the ground. Still, the Gazan people receiving 4 hours electricity only during the 24 hours. So no improvement. Probably if the people will start getting, let's say, 10 hours electricity from the 24 hours, that will give me the impression that probably something will happen between the Fatah and the Hamas. But while the people are still stuck with the 4 hours electricity during the 24 hours, so that's will never give me any kind of impression for any kind of unity or reconciliation between the two parties. Now towards, the political situation. We, the Palestinians, almost stuck, between two big, different political parties, which is the Hamas and the Fatah. I don't believe that any new party will become popular among the Palestinians. And that's reminding me, in the past elections for the Palestinian parliament in 2006, we used to have a very smart guy who was appointed by Abbas, by the way, as a prime minister for 6 years, called Salam Fayyad. Salam Fayyad is a very educated person with a very good economic brain. Before the elections of 2006, he decided to create a new Palestinian political party. And he called it the Third Way. It's like you have Fatah, you have Hamas, then you have the Third Way. When he ran to the elections, how many seats he got? From the 132 seats, 2 seats only. And that's showing how the Palestinians are really more and more restricted between the Fatah and the Hamas. So I'm not expecting, any new political party will be born soon. And I didn't see that the Palestinian Authority or even the Hamas is trying to encourage people, to create a new political parties. I think that people are scared. People are so scared today to come out and to announce on a new political party. On the other side, a new political party need elections. Why you don't have elections in the past, let's say 11 years, so why to think about creation of a new political party? Let us wait and to see if the both sides, the Fatah and the Hamas, will agree on any coming elections. And probably if the new elections will be announced, then probably the situation will allow, the creation of a new political parties then.
We're running out of some time for the formal part of this, but I remind you that we can keep our conversations going out in the lobby afterwards. Did you have a question over here? And I've also gotten a couple of questions about the term BDS that's getting thrown around. I'm not going to go anywhere near defining it for you, but it stands for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, and covers that whole range of a number of efforts. So just so if you know what the term is.
I'm curious your opinion of the mass media and political movements within the Palestinian territory, both the West Bank and Gaza, for the kind of change that you seem to be advocating. It sounds to me like what you're advocating is that the people need to get the leaders out of the way or replace the leaders, replace the corruption, give them dignity, give them a state to fight for, whether it's actually recognized or not. And, you know, in order for that to happen, one would have to assume there's a free press and there's a mass media and there's a movement for these kinds of ideas to travel around. And I don't know if that's the case or not. So if you could speak to that, I'd be very interested.
Yeah, unfortunately, I agree with you that these are, you know, one of the most important elements towards independency, let's call it. But unfortunately, the situation today, even in the West Bank or in the Gaza Strip, is not allowing such kind of things to be developed. We still hesitating, you know, how we can fight the corruption of our own leaders. We don't know how to do it. And I used to say all the time that the rights of the people should have to be guaranteed by the law, by the judiciary, not by the leaders. But unfortunately, there is a lack of judiciary. There is a lack of justice. How you can deal with that? So people are more and more scared, yeah, even to raise such kind of issues. I must have to tell you a very interesting story which happened a month ago in Ramallah. There are a small group of intellectual Palestinians, yeah, decided to make, you know, small conference, and they call it "What After Abbas?" You know, Abbas one day will pass away. No way. I can guarantee that for him. So these people came, I think that around 20 people met, some, you know, activists, some in the civil society, and they met in one of the offices in Ramallah. Just 5 minutes after the conference started, the building was surrounded by the presidential security force, which is Abbas security force. And one of the high chiefs entered the room, asking the people, what you are doing here? They said, we are learning the situation, we are evaluating the situation. And he said, what do you mean, what after Abbas? They said, what you understand from that? He said, what I understand, that Abbas is still alive. Abbas is still alive. So the 20 people were arrested. They kept in one of the prisons in Ramallah for 2 hours, and they has been released after they signed on a commitment not to participate in such kind of conferences. That's, by the way, reminding me in 2001, it's also happened under Arafat authority. And when people met to discuss what after Arafat, Arafat arrested them. So while you have such kind of a dictatorship leadership, you couldn't move, you couldn't think, you are not allowed even to think, not just to do or to participate, even to think. So while the authority is not allowing the people or encouraging the people or promoting the people, I don't think that the people ever will do it on their own behalf.
Hello. I was just wondering if you could talk more about Iran's influence on Hamas and what their agenda is, what they've been doing over the past 5 years, because I think they've been very public in saying they'd like to wipe the state of Israel off the earth. And I'm just curious to know more about, is it just noise and what their actual influence is in the conflict?
See, nobody can deny the relationship between the Hamas and Iran, of course. We saw in the past 10 years how many delegations from the Hamas, from Gaza, from Lebanon, almost visited Iran and talked with the Iranian leaders over there and trying to seek, some kind of help. Now, the new deal today between the Fatah and the Hamas, the initiative itself came from Egypt, by the way. Neither from Hamas nor from Fatah, by the way. It came from Egypt. And because of the bad relation these days between Egypt and Qatar, Egypt and Turkey, Egypt decided that this time we are going to impose a huge limitation on the outside contacts between the Hamas and the outside, which is Hamas, which is Iran, Turkey, and Qatar. This is in the frame of the cold fight, cold war, you can call it, yeah, between Egypt and Qatar, especially. So this is why the Egyptian initiate is such kind of agreement between the Fatah and the Hamas. Because the Egyptians start realizing that the terror inside Sinai almost supported by Qatar. Almost supported by Qatar. And the Hamas also, in the meantime, supported by Qatar. So Egypt was a little bit scared that any deal probably will be cooked here between the Hamas and Qatar against Egypt, especially in Sinai. So how the Egyptians can cut such relationship? By bringing the Hamas by force to reconcile with Fatah in terms to cut their relation between the Hamas and Qatar and Turkey and Iran. So no doubt that Iran right now has a huge influence. Qatar, which is 100,000 people only, has a huge influence right now. A huge influence, especially on terror, of course. Qatar, 100,000 people, all the country. Look what they are doing. Look what they are doing. They are flaming wherever they put their feet. So this is one of the reasons what brought Egypt to sign such kind of deal between the Fatah and the Hamas in terms to pull the carpet from under the foot of Qatar in Gaza especially. Yeah.
All right, so unfortunately that concludes our question and answer session. I would like to thank you all for coming. This was a really good event, and excuse me. And I hope next semester we'll have a speaker with another unique set of ideas. And thank you all for coming. And I would like to remind you at 9 o'clock in the chapel there will be a dialogue if you have any questions. And if you have any questions personally for Bassem, please try to find him outside. Thank you.